Good morning. My name is Joel, and I am excited to get to welcome you to Memorial Baptist Church today. I invite you to sing and praise, worship, and pray with us this morning as we sing. A mighty fortress. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Our helper, he amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe doth seek to work us woe. His craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate. On earth is not his equal. Did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing. Were not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. Dost ask who that may be? Christ Jesus, it is he. Lord Sabaoth, his name. From age to age the same. And we must win the battle. And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God hath willed his truth to triumph through us. The Prince of Darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One little world shall fail him. That word above all earthly powers, no thanks to him abideth. The Spirit and the gifts are ours, through him who with us sided. Let goods and kindred go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. His kingdom is forever. The grace of God has reached for me and pulled me from the raging sea. And I am safe on this solid ground. The Lord is my salvation. I will not fear when darkness falls. His strength will help me scale these walls. I'll see the dawn of the rising sun. The Lord is my salvation. Like the Lord our God, My hope is hidden in the Lord. He flowers each promise of His word. When winter fades, I know spring will come. The Lord is my salvation. Who is like the Lord our God, strong to save, faithful in love. My debt is paid and the victory won. The Lord is my salvation. And when I reach the final day, He will not leave me in the grave, but I will rise. He will call me home. The Lord is my salvation. Who is like the Lord our God, strong to save, faithful in love. My debt is paid and the victory won. The Lord is my salvation. Glory be to God the Father. Glory be to God the Son. Glory be to God the Spirit. The Lord is my salvation. Glory be to God the Father. Glory be to God the Son. Glory be to God the Spirit. The Lord is my salvation. Who is like the Lord our God, strong to save, faithful in love. My debt is paid and the victory won. The Lord is my salvation. The Lord is our salvation. The Lord is our salvation.
Good morning, church. My name is Stephen Grayson, and I am the minister to students here at Memorial Baptist Church. Many of you may know, but in case you don't, today is a special Sunday. Today is our Senior Appreciation Sunday, where we as a church congratulate and honor those who have worked hard to graduate from high school or college. Now, normally we have a big breakfast and we all clap together in the sanctuary, but we can still congratulate our seniors through texting or a phone call, or if you might want to drop off a card or a letter, you can please feel free to do that. We've got many seniors this year. We've got 3 high school seniors and 5 college seniors. Our first of class 2020 is Mary Kate Bordenkircher. Mary Kate is a graduate from Battle High School, and this fall will be attending Missouri University of Science and Technology to study to be a pharmacist. Our next graduate is someone who grew up in this church and someone you probably have seen running around, Lucas Diggs. Lucas is graduating this year from Hickman High School, and this fall will be attending State Technical College of Missouri in Osage County to learn the craft of welding. Our last high school senior is someone who just recently joined us. She comes from the country of Russia as a missionary, and she's been homeschooled by her parents. Faith Jetton. Faith is graduating from homeschool. This fall, she will be joining her brother at Ouachita Baptist University in Arkansas, where she will plan on studying sociology. Moving on to our college graduates, we have 5. The first one is my frenemy, and also someone who loves to make fun of every single sweater that I own. DJ Agisiabo. DJ is graduating with her master's in business administration with a concentration in accounting from the University of Southern Indiana. Our next graduate is someone who recently joined us as well. His name is Will Deckard. Will is graduating from the University of Missouri here in Columbia with a degree in electrical engineering. Will has been offered a job as a planning engineer with Toth and Associates in Springfield, Missouri. Our next graduate is someone who also grew up in this church, Christina Eubanks. Christina is graduating from the University of Missouri College of Arts and Science with a degree in fine arts. Her concentration was in photography and film, and currently she is working in the field of photography. Our next graduate is someone you may all know, Ariana Varner. Ariana has been a recipient of the Randy Shilb Scholarship for multiple years now. Ariana is graduating from Stevens College with a degree in fashion design and product development with a minor in graphic design. Ariana is currently applying to a position at her dream company, Pyre Moss, and in the future, she hopes to open her own namesake apparel brand. And our last graduate is Whitney Jedden. Whitney will be graduating with a degree in graphic design from Ouachita Baptist University. She will also be getting married in a few weeks. Her and her husband will be living here in Columbia. She's currently looking for a job in graphic design. Let's give it up for the class of 2020. Graduates, we are excited to see where God leads you in life. As the old saying goes, the clam is your oyster, or oyster is your world. You know what? I actually don't know how the old saying goes, but nonetheless, we are excited to see where you end up. And wherever you do end up, we ask that you continue to strive for community in the church, because your gifts that God has given you are unique to you, and you help make the church as a whole one body. You help me or us, and we help you grow into the image of God that God had always intended us to be. We're sorry for the lack of graduation that you have. It really stinks that this pandemic is going on right at a crucial time in chapter-changing life moment of yours. But that won't replace your hard work. No pandemic can. You guys got to where you are because of your tenacity, your parents and your teachers, your community, and God. And we want to give thanks to that. So seniors, as you go into the world and put a mark on the world for yourself, remember, in all things, honor God and seek his kingdom.
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. Thank you that we are able to gather wherever we are and to come together knowing that we serve an amazing God. Father, I pray for those people who are going through allergy season right now. Just be with them and be with the symptoms that come from allergies, especially in this time of year with what's currently happening in the world. Also want to pray for everybody and their work situations, whether they're grateful to be currently working or sad about not working or sad about working. Just pray that you be with each and every one of them. We especially want to thank you today for the students who are graduating, whether it be high school or college or whatever they have gone ahead and accomplished. We hope that they are able to use that for your kingdom, Lord. Thank you for this church family. Thank you for this time today. In your name we pray. Amen.
Join me in reading Psalm 31. In you, O Lord, I seek refuge. Do not let me ever be put to shame. In your righteousness, deliver me. Incline your ear to me, rescue me speedily. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. You are indeed my rock and my fortress. For your name's sake, lead me and guide me. Take me out to the net that is hidden for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. You hate those who pay regard to worthless idols, but I trust in the Lord. I will exult and rejoice in your steadfast love, because you have seen my affliction and you have taken heed of my adversities. And you have not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. You have set my feet in a broad place. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye wastes away from grief, my soul and body also. For my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my misery, and my bones waste away. I am the scorn of all my adversaries, a horror to my neighbors, an object of dread to my acquaintances. For those who see me in the street flee from me. I have passed out of mind like one who is dead. I have become like a broken vessel, for I hear the whispering of many, terror all around. As they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life, but I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Deliver me from the hand of my enemies and persecutors. Let your face shine upon your servant. Save me in your steadfast love.
Every year around this time, we take a moment and pause to recognize the accomplishments of the graduates in the midst of our community and tell them well done for the job that they have accomplished. And it's an important thing to do, not just for the graduates, but for us as well, to recognize this rite of passage and the movement from one area or one chapter of life into another. But for a community like Columbia, well, graduation's not just an event, is it? It's a season, really, around here, where the whole community seems to go through this yearly rite of passage together, year after year. And so this year, as everything has been turned upside down, it's not just the graduates and their families that feel the absence of this yearly ritual. It's something that all of us are experiencing, the strangeness of this season. But if there's any good news in the midst of missing your graduation ceremony, I feel like it should be that you don't have to sit through a boring graduation speech. So one thing that I don't want to do this morning is to do that. But I did hope that maybe this opportunity before us would be a chance for us to look at what it means to move through those liminal spaces in lives, in our lives together. So that's a concept that I spend quite a bit of time thinking about. I love the idea of liminal spaces, that transitional space in between one point and another in our lives. Sometimes we refer to those liminal spaces as rites of passage, as I mentioned earlier, those events or those movements through time that we take particular notice of, and graduation certainly falls in that category. But all of us are between 2 points in one way or another, and you could certainly make a case that in many ways all of life is a liminal space as we are transitioning and being transformed in the midst of the journey of life, moving between birth and death. Well, wherever it is that you are on your journey today, I would invite you to think for a moment about the ways that God might be present in this time and space in your life. So let's dive in together into Psalm 31 as we consider these things. Psalm 31 is a psalm that in many ways borrows language and concepts from a lot of other psalms. It's going to sound very familiar, and some of the same themes or concepts that we've been exploring the last few weeks will rise to the surface again this week. Psalm 31, well, like all the Psalms, is a psalm that in many ways is timeless. It speaks, when it was born out of a particular time and situation, but the wisdom it has to offer and the glimpse that it gives us into life, and particularly life with God, is essential. I don't know who to attribute it to, but I do know that at some point this week I read a quote where someone was talking about the permanence of the Psalms and the ways that the Psalms have lasted generation from generation. And they said that after all of the self-help books that currently fill the shelves in our bookstores and libraries have all disappeared, the Psalms will remain. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that quote. We have found these prayers, these songs that we call the Psalms, to be time-tested and proven true again and again. And so may the Spirit of God once more bring this psalm to life within us today. Psalm 31. In you, O Lord, I seek refuge. Do not let me ever be put to shame. In your righteousness, deliver me. Incline your ear to me. Rescue me speedily. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. From the time that we are born, we have an instinct put inside of us to grasp after life, don't we? You know this is true if you've ever been around a newborn baby, and you know what happens when you place your finger within the palm of their hand. They have an instinctive reflex to grasp on to your finger, to grasp on to any signs of life. Well, that's not just true of newborns, it seems. We, as humans, tend to follow that same instinct throughout much of our lives if we're not careful. And I was thinking this week about graduation and that ceremony and the way that what we expect during this season is to walk across the stage and to hold out the palm of our hand and for someone to drop that diploma within our hand and to grasp on to that accomplishment. And again, we commend graduates in those moments, as we should, for all of their hard work and all of their accomplishments and everything that that moment represents, which is quite a lot in life, isn't it? But there are other pictures of grasping that we see throughout our lives, and particularly maybe even in rites of passage as we make our way through life. I think of a husband and wife standing there in the midst of a marriage ceremony, and as they hold out their hands and grasp on to their new life partner. Or maybe if you've been a parent, you know that feeling of holding out your hand and telling your young child, grasp onto my hand before we cross the street together. There are times in our lives that are represented by firm handshakes, perhaps. You remember handshakes? Those moments that mark maybe a new partnership or maybe a new relationship or entering into a new stage or season of life. And even at the end, there are often those moments where we reach out and grasp the hand of those whom we love, who are passing from this life into the next. During times that catch us off guard or times that are challenging, perhaps in life, I don't know about you, but there is an inclination within me to often try to grasp onto life even harder, to double down. If I can just work harder, or if I can just work smarter, or if I can just do more, well, then we can make it through, right? And this is a very difficult thing to break. And in some ways, you may be wondering, well, is this something that we should break or not? After all, there's a lot of good that comes out of that, right? We commend people for their hard work, and we commend people for their tenacity in the face of challenges. And sometimes to double down or to work through difficulty, I mean, that's a really important attribute of healthy living from time to time. So why would I say that we need to break this habit in our lives? Well, I think that sometimes we become far too convinced of our own abilities in the midst of life. And sometimes we depend far too much on our own understanding, on our own abilities, on our own work ethic, on our own fill in the blank. From birth to death, we have a tendency to grasp on with all of our power. Until our knuckles turn white or until our strength fades away, we try to hang on with every fiber of our being. But there are moments in life where perhaps a wiser course would be to learn to let go, to entrust ourselves to something bigger than ourselves, to entrust ourselves ultimately to the source of all being, to God himself. And that's the place that Psalm 31 begins, in you. God is our foundation. We know that to be true. And we know that it's important as we set out through life for our lives to be built upon a strong foundation. But sometimes I think we begin to reduce the meaning of that phrase or that idea to believe somehow that what we learned as a child then becomes the way that we understand God throughout the rest of our lives. And I think that that's a misnomer, because if your understanding and relationship with God doesn't continue to grow and to evolve as you journey through this life, well, it's probably not going to make the journey with you then, is it? Far too often, I see people either abandon their faith because they simply can't take with them their experience with God that they once had in a different stage of life. The constraints that they've placed around that, the limitations that they've placed upon God have nothing to do with God, really, but only with their own understanding of God and with their own cheapened definition of how God might actually be moving in their life at that point. God, though, is the constant in our life. I said God is the ground of all being, but God is the ground of my being, of your being. God is the one who transitions alongside of us in the midst of all of the changes of our lives. God may not change in his own attributes or characteristics, but you can bet that the ways that we encounter God will definitely change along the way, as any healthy and growing relationship would. And so, at the beginning of Psalm 31, we're reminded of the source of our being, and we're reminded of the constant presence of God in the midst of our lives. That is so essential. That is what is foundational. Not our understanding of God that will, again, change as we grow, but God's presence in our life, which doesn't change, even in the midst of circumstances. In you, O Lord, I seek refuge. Verse 2, incline your ear to me, or stoop down low to hear my call, to hear my prayer, O God. Be a rock of refuge for me. And we see that term refuge has already appeared twice, just in these two short verses. And we see other synonyms for refuge, including rock a couple times, showing up just in the verses right ahead. And the idea of God being our refuge, of God being both the source of our protection and God the one who cares for us in the midst of life, this is an essential place for us to stand. God is not just our creator, but God is our sustainer, the one who sees us through. There's an interesting dynamic in the Psalms. If we pair this idea of God as our refuge alongside the idea of God as our pathway in the midst of life. Those two images seem like they almost contradict one another, but you have to carry both of them at the same time. Yes, God is the constant companion, the one who goes with you along the way, but God is also the firm foundation. God is the refuge, the place where we then are protected and cared for in the midst of life's ever-changing tides. Continuing with verse 3, you are indeed my rock and my fortress. For your name's sake, lead me and guide me. Take me out of the net that is hidden for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. We see those dual images of God as the one who travels alongside of us, a guide along the way, but also God, the one who is both our rock and our fortress in the midst of life as well. Verse 4 is emphatic that it is you, O God, who are my refuge. That is, again, pointing back to what verse 1 told us, that really it's all in the source of God himself. It's in the source of our relationship with God. That is what sustains us. It's not the circumstances. It's not the good fortune or the bad things that happen as well. It is only in God himself that we find a true refuge in the midst of our lives. And verse 5 is probably the most famous part of this psalm, as verse 5 was what Jesus cried out in Luke's gospel as he was dying on the cross in chapter 23. It's the last words recorded of Jesus' life before the resurrection in Luke, and he calls out, into your hands I commit my spirit. And we see a similar thing happen in Acts chapter 7 as Stephen follows Jesus' lead as he commits his spirit to God as well. A couple things I want to say about this very briefly. One is the importance here is not just committing our spirit to God in the midst of death, but, Jesus had committed his spirit to God in the midst of all of his life as well. And the same should be true for us. We see that in this psalm, that to commit ourselves to God is to commit all of our life to God. The word for spirit here, ruah, is not some disembodied existence where it's a picture of a soul that somehow leaves the body and then is entrusted to God. No, this is our life breath is maybe a good way to translate spirit here. May God take all of our life, and may we entrust all of our life then into the hands of God. I turn my life over to you, God, might be a good way to think of it. And this is such a different image than what I was talking about earlier when I mentioned so much of our life is marked by the things that we can grasp or hang on to. Here we see Jesus modeling for us a very different path, don't we? It's not a path of white-knuckling and clenched fist. No, it's a path of opening our hands and entrusting all of life, all of our life, back to the one who gave it to us in the first place, knowing that it's only in the hands of God that we are truly secure. No matter how much we accomplish, no matter how great the work of our hands has been up to this point in our life, it doesn't really matter. The grasp of our hands is not enough, is it? No, it's only in the midst of entrusting ourselves to God that we find true peace. It's only in the midst of trusting ourselves to God that we find the type of hope and the type of wholeness and well-being that we truly desire. Yes, our grasp is never enough. It's never big enough to hang on to the things that really matter. Again and again, we search in the midst of this life for the things that will last. But if we're not careful, we'll easily be distracted by things that will fade away. Verse 6, as we continue on, speaks just to that. I hate those who pay regard to worthless idols, but I trust in the Lord. I will exult and rejoice in your steadfast love, because you have seen my affliction. You have taken heed of my adversities, and have not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. You have set my feet in a broad place. A more literal translation of the beginning of verse 6 there is, I hate those who look to vaporous lies, or those who watch empty vapors. I think of an image of who are grasping after empty vapors. It is referring to idols, as many English translations point out, but it's also, in many ways, you can see, referring to things that just simply will not last, the things that fade away. In great contrast to that is the second part of verse 6, but I trust in you. As Marva Dawn reminds us, it is in the midst of our struggles, especially when we are lonely or mourning, that we need to keep reasserting that our God is Yahweh. Otherwise, we fall into the temptation of making idols out of security, or marriage, or companionship, or possessions, or whatever else we think we need to ease our loneliness and grief. If we're not careful, we can end up making idols out of all sorts of things, both things that are bad and things that are in and of themselves good. But whenever we start to place our trust in those things, well, those things begin to take a place in our life that they were never intended to fill. But in the midst of trusting God, no matter the circumstances, trusting God, exulting in Him, rejoicing in God's steadfast love, then we find ourselves in a new place, don't we? In a broad place, in a wide open place. As the Message translates the end of verse 8 there, God gave me room to breathe. The world begins to open back up to us. We're no longer trapped in those enclosed spaces of life, but now we find ourselves in spacious and good places to thrive. And with the end of verse 8, we mark the end of the first section of Psalm 31. Verse 9 begins a new section, and we're going to skip down a little bit, but if you read verses 9 through 13, you see that life is often filled with challenging or difficult circumstances, sometimes quite horrible circumstances that we must account for. Picking up in verse 14, but even in the midst of that, but I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Deliver me from the hand of my enemies and persecutors. Let your face shine upon your servant. Save me in your steadfast love. Back in verses 5 through 6, we saw a movement in the psalm going from your hand to I trust. Well, here in verses 14 and 15, we see a movement of a similar sort, just going in the opposite direction, from I trust to my times are in your hand. Hour by hour, I place my days in your hand, in other words. To entrust our lives and our futures back to God. God's the one who gave them to us in the first place. And now this is merely the act of not just recognizing it, but of actively trusting all of that back to God. For putting our times back into God's hand is really the only path toward peace. You see, nothing can take us out of the hands of God. Jesus reminds us of that twice. If you go back and read John chapter 10, nothing can snatch you out of the hand of God. And yet, we still struggle often to find God in the midst of our circumstances, in the midst of, those horrible or difficult days in life. But how can we then be present to the reality of God even in those times? And how can we fully trust God in the midst of that? I'd like to read to you a quote from a former professor of mine, Dennis Tucker, who, commenting on this psalm, says, "Lament psalms often serve as vehicles that enable us to be fully present to God when the circumstances of life appear to drive us elsewhere. Words of lament become our words in our attempts to find our way to God. Lament psalms may at times lead us to invoke the prayer of Karl Rahner, who wrote of God, 'You have seized me. I have not grasped you.' When life's circumstances have caused us to lose our grip on the world around us, and we no longer feel we can even grasp God or understand God's way in the world, we still need to know something of the God that has seized us. It's not about the things we can grasp. No, it is about the one who has seized us, the one who has grasped us fully in his embrace." Continuing in verses 19 through 24. "Oh, how abundant is your goodness that you have laid up for those who fear you, and accomplished for those who take refuge in you, in the sight of everyone. In the shelter of your presence you hide them from human plots. You hold them safe under your shelter from contentious tongues. Blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love to me when I was beset as a city under siege. I had said in my alarm, I am driven far from your sight. But you heard my supplications when I cried out to you for help. Love the Lord, all you his saints. The Lord preserves the faithful, but abundantly repays the one who acts haughtily. Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord. This is the concluding section of Psalm 31. And the psalmist now, though the circumstances have not changed, he comes out of this process with a renewed faith and a renewed perspective. And now he begins to speak of the benefits of trusting one's life and one's future to God. The psalm begins and ends, and, well, is saturated throughout with this theme of trust in God. To be held by the hands of God is to be embraced by the hands of faithfulness and steadfast love. Those are two themes, two characteristics of God that we see again and again in this psalm. But one thing that's perhaps subtle but so very important for us to grasp is here in verse 23, we see that now God's steadfastly loved or loving ones and his faithful ones appear at the end of this psalm. It's a word to the congregation, a word to all of us who have encountered this God of faithfulness and steadfast love. See, the thing is as we enter into a relationship with God and as we journey through life with God, we begin then to take on the characteristics of God as well. And God's faithfulness and God's steadfast love, that begins to be part of the very fabric of our lives as well. And so the question isn't merely, what is it that you are forming with your hands? No, the question is, how are you being formed? We receive our identity not by the things that fade away. No, but we receive our identity by the eternal embrace of God, from beginning to end and throughout all of life's transitions along the way. Thanks be to God.
I cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see his wounds, his hands, his feet, my Savior on that cursed tree. His body bound and drenched in tears, they laid him down in Joseph's tomb, the entrance sealed by heavy stone. Messiah still and all alone. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh, Lord our God. Then on the third, at break of dawn, the Son of Heaven rose again. Oh, trample death, where is your sting? The angels roar for Christ the King. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. of white. The blazing sun shall pierce the night, and I will rise among the saints, my gaze transfixed on Jesus' face. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord, our Here we go. God. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. Yeah, for endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord, our God. Oh Lord, our God. Oh Lord, our God.
And now, as we receive these parting words, I would invite you to stick around after the benediction because there will be a short slideshow to honor our high school graduates. And so you're welcome to stick around and to celebrate this occasion with them. But as you go, in the midst of all of the liminal spaces of your life, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his smile upon you and give you peace, now and all of your days. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Spirit. Amen.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art. There my best thought, by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence I light. Be thou my wisdom, and thou my truth. I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, Spirit and Son, thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one. Without you we have no sight. Find the dark and speak the light. You who bring the dead to life, be all in all. Riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise. Thou mine inheritance now and always. Thou and thou May I reach heaven's joy, oh bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision. Oh.